Tadekam smaramas-tadekam bhajamah. Tadekam jagat sakshi rupam namamah. Sadekam nidhanam niralambamisham. Bhavam bodhipotam sharanyam vrajamah. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. On that alone do we meditate, that alone do we worship, to that alone, the witness of the universe, do we bow. To that one who is our sole eternal support, the self-existent Lord, the raft to safety across the ocean of this world, do we come for refuge. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning, and Happy New Year. It's not too late yet to wish you a Happy New Year. And it's always a wonderful feeling of starting afresh and a new year, and it may also bring some feelings of trepidation, some feeling of nervousness. What will the new year bring? In the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition, of course, New Year's Day itself is a very holy day. It's the day when Sri Ramakrishna is said to have become a Kalpataru, a wish-fulfilling tree, when he granted spiritual illumination to his disciples, revealed himself as a great world teacher. Now, interesting thing about the name Kalpataru Day, that was coined by his disciple Ramchandra Datta. But Swami Saradananda, his principal biographer, suggested that actually Kalpataru is not the right word, because Kalpataru is the mythical heavenly tree which grants you whatever you want. Sri Ramakrishna didn't do that. How many desires are lurking in all of our hearts and minds? And Sri Ramakrishna didn't grant those kinds of desires. He granted only spiritual desires. He granted spiritual illumination. That's direct realization, direct experience of the divine. So Swami Saradananda suggests it shouldn't really be called the Kalpataru Day. We should call it the day on which Sri Ramakrishna revealed himself and thereby granted fearlessness to all. This idea of Atma Prakasha Purvaka Shakalke Abhaya Pradana in the Bengali, granting fearlessness to all by revealing himself. So that seems a very appealing idea to me. Like the Hindu deities who have a palm upraised, granting fearlessness. Sri Ramakrishna became like that, granting fearlessness. So I thought to take up the topic of fearlessness as a wonderful something to think about. How Sri Ramakrishna granted fearlessness, how that blessed fearlessness can be ours also. So fearlessness is a wonderful quality, extolled in the scriptures. The Bhagavad Gita lists it as one of the qualities to be cultivated for seekers of God. And Swami Vivekananda also emphasized it so much. Abhi, be fearless, he would say. The Upanishads say with one word, Abhi, be fearless. He would charge his disciples and his monastic brothers. And yet, it's easy to say, but we find that fear is a pretty big problem in our modern lives. And we have so many things to be afraid of. There's a fascinating study conducted by Chapman University. In the last 2 years, I think they did it, 2 or 3 years, in what people in the United States fear most. It's quite interesting. They selected fears in different domains. There's different domains of fear. Fear of government, man-made disasters, economic, crime, illness and death, personal fears, fear of technology, fear of natural disasters, fears about immigration and demographic change, fears about relationship and about the environment. And the top, in 2016, the top fear was listed as fear of corrupt government officials. 60% of Americans in this survey apparently said they were afraid or very afraid of corrupt government officials. And the other top 9 that dropped down to between 35 and 40%. Fear of terrorist attack, of not having enough money for the future, of terrorism itself, of government restrictions on guns and ammunition, of fear of people I love dying, fear of economic collapse, fear of identity theft, fear of people I love becoming seriously ill, and fear of Obamacare. These are, these are the top 10 fears according to Chapman University's study. Now, it's interesting, but it's also really quite unsatisfying. It seems to ignore the distinctions we have between real deep-seated fears and superficial fears and worries. And I think the way they conducted the survey was to ask, well, are you afraid of this? Yes or no? Well, yeah, I'm afraid of terrorism. Okay, yes, you're afraid of terrorism. Are you afraid of Obamacare? Well, it's a little worrisome. Yeah, I'll put yes. So it seems to be a little superficial. But more than that, it's all about external fears. And it reflects, of course, the external materialistic worldview of scientists and the material basis of the scientific worldview and the modern worldview. It doesn't touch the kinds of fears that really we have deep within, for the most part, that oftentimes we're not even conscious of. Of course, it does capture the generally anxious tenor of life in the modern world. Generally, people are anxious, people are fearful. And it may not be surprising for people who are living in a war zone, but this is not a war zone. This is the United States. It's a safe country, more or less. But then again, all we need to do is watch the evening news or read the newspapers. It's full of fear, full of things giving us fear. And then we can watch all the television programs or movies and we'll get more things that make us fear. So wouldn't it be a great blessing if we could be free of fear? Now some may object, well, but actually fear is what keeps everything running. If people weren't afraid of the police, everybody would steal stuff. If people if we weren't afraid of getting heart disease, we wouldn't bother exercising. If I wasn't afraid of the audit, from the IRS, if there was no audit, I wouldn't pay my taxes. So that's one side of it. But if we're walking on the trail and we see a rattlesnake, a little fear is good. It makes us cautious to avoid the rattlesnake. But there are many people who won't walk on the trail at all for fear of the rattlesnake. There are many people who won't go. That kind of fear is crippling, is paralyzing. That begins to be like a phobia. So the survey, let's move on from the survey, this superficial fear. Let's look a little at the more deep-seated fears, the kind of fears that we may not even be aware that we have. The fear of commitment, or fear of intimacy, fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of success even, fear of rejection. These are the kinds of fears the deep-seated psychological fears that really hold us back in our life and also in our spiritual life. There's a psychologist, Karl Albrecht, who's working today. He makes a wonderful analysis, boiling all our fears down into 5 basic fears. He says there are just 5 basic fears in which all the fears can be placed. And I like his analysis. First is the fear of extinction, the fear of annihilation, of ceasing to exist, of death. Second is the fear of mutilation, of losing a part of the body, of the thought of having the boundary of the body penetrated by, invaded, or losing the integrity of any organ. So anxiety about diseases, about animals like spiders and snakes and creepy crawlies that might crawl in and that kind of thing. Those all fall into that kind of fear. A lot of people are terrified of spiders, you know. It's a real fear people have. Third kind of fear, loss of autonomy. Fear of being immobilized, paralyzed, restricted, caught, enveloped, overwhelmed, entrapped, imprisoned, smothered, and so on. Claustrophobia is an example. Fear of commitment is another example. It extends to our interactions. The fourth fear he notes is the fear of separation, the fear of abandonment, of rejection, of losing connectedness, not being respected or valued. And the fifth fear he calls the fear of ego death. Under this fear, he puts the fear of humiliation, the fear of shame, the fear of disapproval of others, the fear of the shattering or disintegration of one's constructed sense of self. This, of course, is not the true self, but the false self. That which we think we are, we work pretty hard to protect. And so we fear when it gets threatened, we become afraid. And of course, it is this fear also that plays a role in when we come to advanced meditation, when we come to deep meditation. And at that, there comes a point in our meditation, in our spiritual life, when that false self who we think we are begins to melt away, begins to merge into the undifferentiated absolute. That can be profoundly frightening, and that is considered the obstacle in spiritual life, in advanced meditation. So this is 5 basic fears. It's more satisfying than the first delineation of actually they come up with dozens of fears, of which I read the first 10. But it doesn't really. Can we boil it down to one thing? How, if we want to overcome fear and attain the blessedness of fearlessness, can we boil it down to one thing? What would that be? How do we even define fear? It may be helpful to look at one definition from Ramanuja, the great qualified non-dualist teacher. He notes that we have, of course, there's 2 primary attitudes we have towards things in this world: attraction and aversion. Either we like things or we don't like things. And we are attracted to pleasure, and we are averse to pain. And fear is simply the awareness of the misery which comes at the absence of pleasure or at the presence of pain. So when we become conscious of the possibility of losing a pleasurable thing, like a fat bank balance, or we become aware of the possibility of a painful experience, like a snake looks like it could bite me, then fear arises. That misery is that fear is what is that awareness of that possibility. So let's look a little more closely at what Patanjali says about fear, because he notes that there are. He names this as one of the primary obstacles in spiritual life. In the Yoga Sutras, he calls it the triad of attraction and aversion, which we just covered, and fear, abhinivesha, which is it's the instinctive clinging to a worldly life, the instinctive clinging to life, which is really another word for a fear of death, along with ignorance and egotism as the last of the 5. Swami Vivekananda notes that this clinging to life, this fear of death, has become instinctive. It's a deep-rooted samskara, a deep-rooted tendency. Where does this tendency come from? I think it's a primal, atavistic mental impulse with its roots reaching back to our ancient ancestors. Look at the natural world. Look at the natural world. How many animals are eating each other? Small fish eat shrimp, big fish eat small fish, shark eat big fish, sharks eat big fish. Then we can say, look at the seals eat big fish, and killer whales eat seals, and spiders eat insects, birds eat spiders, big birds eat small birds. It doesn't stop. And at the top of this chain of eating are the big, they call them the top predators, like crocodiles. Nobody eats a crocodile, but a crocodile eats everything, including human beings. We have man-eating crocodiles in Australia, man-eating crocs, and tigers, lions, pythons. So fear is it's hardwired in the physical system itself, because it reaches all the way back to this dog-eat-cat world, or how should we call it, where so many animals are eating each other. And this is like, it's bequeathed to us by our animal ancestors. So this strikes me as the root of fear. This fear of extinction, of death, of ego death, it's all connected to this. It's actually hardwired through our evolutionary experience, where the risk of becoming someone else's dinner was always very real. Now we direct this negative emotion, we apply it now to our lives, to so many other areas where actually there's no real danger, no real risk. But this negative emotion, this fear, if we can face this fear, if we can conquer this fear of death, shouldn't we then be able to conquer all the fears? By facing this fear of death, shouldn't we be fearless in all spheres of life? Well, the Vedantic solution, of course, as we all know, is that we are making a big mistake if we think that we are our bodies. Yes, the body will die. Yes, the body could become lunch for a tiger or a crocodile, but that's not us. That's not who we are. That's we can hear from thousands of years ago the voice of Sri Krishna blaring out on the battlefield to Arjuna, telling him, "Na jayate mriyate va kadachit, nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyah, ajo nitya shashvato yam purano, na hanyate hanyamane sharire." O Arjuna, never is the one who you really are, your true self. Never is this one born, and never does it die. Nor is it that having come to exist, it will again cease to be. This one is birthless, eternal, undecaying, and ancient. It is not killed when the body is killed. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya, navani grihnati naroparani, tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani, anyani sanyati navani dehi. He gives the beautiful example of clothing. As someone casts off worn out clothes and puts on fresh ones, when our clothes get holes in them, we throw them away and put on new ones. Just like that, the embodied one rejects the worn out bodies and puts on new ones. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati papakaha, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati marutaha, achedyo yamadahyo yam akledyo shoshya evacha, nitya sarvagata sthanuhu, achalo yam sanatanaha. Weapons do not cut it, fire does not burn it, water does not moisten it, and air does not dry it, that which you really are. It, your true self, cannot be cut, cannot be burnt, cannot be moistened, and surely cannot be dried up. It is eternal, omnipresent, unmoving, and changeless. To realize this is to destroy forever the fear of death. This is the assurance granted us by the great world teachers like Sri Krishna. This is the realization granted by Sri Ramakrishna on January 1st, 1886. You are not a body. You are not even a mind. You are spirit, eternal, and ever free. This fear you have of death is based on a misidentification, a profound misidentification of who you really are. So if we can conquer this fear, the other fears will evaporate. And what is this fear then based on? Ignorance. Ignorance of who we really are. A misidentification. The sages of ancient India had analyzed the human condition and found solutions to the problems of our lives. And they take this one step further, one little step further. There's a little fable, we can say, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad about Brahma, Hiranyagarbha, who is the first manifestation of the unconditioned absolute Brahman, who is called the Creator God. And he first came and he was alone, and he felt afraid being alone. He felt afraid. And the Upanishad says that's why when we're alone, we also feel afraid. And then it occurred to him, if there is nothing else but me, then what am I afraid of? And immediately his fear evaporated. His fear was gone. For what was there to fear? He was alone. And then the Upanishad says, it is from a second entity that fear comes. What was there to fear? If it's only me, then what is there to fear? So this is the further analysis. Dvitiyad vai bhayam havati. It is from the second entity that fear comes. Fear is understood as rising from duality. Analyze it. Fear is always something I'm afraid of something outside of me, something separate from me. So long as we consider ourselves puny, limited beings, there will always be duality. There will always be something outside of me, something separate from me which can harm me, which will cause me fear. So long as I do not know who I am, so long as we do not know who we are, we will be subject to fear. So it is when we touch the infinite, when we find that the limited self, which sees itself as separate, merges into that infinite ocean of consciousness, that the fear also evaporates, because what besides me is there? What besides that infinite consciousness is there to fear? Yama describes what happens when we know the Atman, the self. In the Katha Upanishad, he's teaching Nachiketa about the secret of death. And he uses very interesting language. He says, when one realizes the self, then one no longer seeks to protect oneself. Natato vijugupsati. One no longer seeks to protect oneself because one knows that it doesn't need to be protected. Shankaracharya explains that one who knows the self will not, after attaining that knowledge, desire to protect the Atman, desire to protect the self. Having attained fearlessness, it is only as long as one, being in the midst of fear, thinks oneself to be non-eternal, so long will one desire to protect the self. But when one knows the self to be one without a second and eternal, then who would be wishing to save it? And what would one wish to save? And from whom would one wish to save it? So it's this Vedantic realization where there is not even the slightest differentiation between me and you. The old me and you melt away in the realization of non-duality. And then we attain to true fearlessness. In fact, this is called, attaining this realization is called attaining to fearlessness. Yajnavalkya, teaching Janaka, the king in the Chandogya Upanishad, tells him, Brihadaranyaka rather, Abhayam vai Janaka praptosi. You have attained abhayam, fearlessness, O Janaka. You have attained fearlessness. So that's all very well and good, but it's pretty tough, isn't it, just to talk about these things and how to realize it, how to put it into practice. I have so many realizing non-duality. I'm worried about, I'm afraid of talking to my boss tomorrow to ask him for a raise, and you're talking about non-duality. What's all this? Well, we don't drag the ideal down to our level. We try to raise ourselves up to the ideal. Let us practice it. Let us cultivate a new self-image, an image of ourselves as luminous consciousness, as luminous beings. Start of thinking ourselves less as a body than as a mind. And gradually, we start thinking of ourselves less as a mind and more as the consciousness that is aware of the mind. So we have so many habits of speech. You know, we say, I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat. Notice it. I am hungry. Am I hungry? Body is hungry. Body needs fuel. Am I hungry? No, I'm not hungry. Body is feeling hungry. All right, I'll put some food into the body. I'll feed the body. I'm cold. Am I really cold? I'm not cold. I am beyond heat and cold. The body is feeling cold. Even these little things, can we notice how we use language? I'm feeling sad. I'm sad. Am I really sad? I am of the nature of infinite bliss. Mind is feeling sad. I'm aware of my mind feeling sad. I'm aware of the emotion of sadness, but I am separate from that awareness of sadness. I am that awareness. I am not the sadness. So this is how we begin to apply the teachings of Vedanta in our lives. We practice it. When we're on the freeway driving to work, or sitting on the bus, or having an argument with someone, can we at the same time say, well, that's not me. I am watching it. I am separate from it. Swami Vivekananda gives another hint. He says, look on fear as something despicable, as something low and not becoming to who I really am. He says, always say, I have no fear. Tell this to everybody. Have no fear. Fear is death. Fear is sin. Fear is hell. Fear is unrighteousness. Fear is wrong life. All the negative thoughts and ideas that are in this world have proceeded from this evil spirit of fear. So here he's suggesting that we look upon fear as a debilitating weakness based upon ignorance of who we are, and reject it. I'm sure he loved Shakespeare's insight. He has Julius Caesar, on the day he's going to be assassinated, there are all kinds of bad signs, and he knows something's up, and his wife is begging him, don't go to the forum. But he says, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. How wonderful. I'm sure Swami Vivekananda knew it, although I couldn't find him quoting it. But how wonderful. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. As every time we fear, it's a kind of death. We fear every time we think, oh, I'm scared of dying, that's a death itself. The hero dies once only. And how strange. We all must die. Come to peace with that. All right, I'm going to die. Why worry about it now? Be prepared for it. But why run it through my mind again and again? That's dying again and again. Death will come when it comes. And I'm reminded of a good friend I had in college who really struck me as fearless. A fearless person, unafraid of going to speak with people big people I'd be afraid to go speak with, all those kind of things. So I asked, well, where does this fearlessness come from? And she said, I have made peace with death. And at a very young age, she had made peace with death, and that made her, to a great extent, fearless. It's wonderful. Swami Vivekananda delineates two kinds of courage. One is the courage of facing the cannon. When everyone is watching in the heat of battle, yes, we can face the cannon. That's easy, actually. It's easy to be brave when everyone is watching. But the other is the courage of spiritual conviction. And he liked to recount two incidents in Indian history. One in ancient history, when Alexander the Great had invaded India. And let me read, it's a wonderful passage from Lectures from Colombo to Almora. In my mind rises from the past the vision of the great emperor of the West, Alexander the Great. And I see, as it were in a picture, the great monarch standing on the bank of the Indus, talking to one of our sannyasins in the forest, one of our monks. The old man he was talking to, perhaps naked, stark naked, sitting upon a block of stone, and the emperor, astonished at his wisdom, tempting him with gold and honor to come over to Greece. And this man smiles at his gold and smiles at his temptations and refuses. And then the emperor, standing on his authority as an emperor, says, I will kill you if you do not come. And the man bursts into a laugh and says, you never told such a falsehood in your life as you tell just now. Who can kill me? Me you kill, emperor of the material world? Never, for I am spirit unborn and undecaying. Never was I born, and never do I die. I am the infinite, the omnipresent, the omniscient, and you kill me, child that you are? That is strength, he says. That is strength. He also liked to recount in the so-called Mutiny of 1857, which was an uprising against the British by some of the Indian soldiers. A monk was stabbed by one of the mutineers, by a Muslim. And Swami Vivekananda says that there was a Swami, a very great soul, whom a Muslim mutineer stabbed severely. Now the Hindu mutineers caught and brought the man to the Swami. So they were both Hindus and Muslims rebelling, but somehow in all the fight, a monk was stabbed. And so the Hindus brought the Muslim to the monk who was stabbed and offered to kill him. But the Swami looked up calmly and said, my brother, thou art he, and left the body, died there on the spot, after saying, you who have stabbed me are that same reality which I am. This, says Swami Vivekananda, is spiritual boldness. And then he goes on to say, stand up, men and women. In this spirit, dare to believe in the truth. Dare to practice the truth. The world requires a few hundred bold men and women. Practice that boldness which dares know the truth, which dares show the truth in life, which does not quake before death, nay, welcomes death, makes a man know that he is the spirit, that in the whole universe nothing can kill him. Then you will be free, then you will know your real soul. The fiery words of Swami Vivekananda, always a good injection of energy and conviction. There are some well-known incidents in the life of Swami Vivekananda about how he was ready to face his fears, face anything that would make us afraid. And of course, in the first one, it's when he learned the lesson. He was still a wandering monk before he had hit the world stage, and he was visiting a temple in Varanasi, in Benares, the famous Durga temple there. And there was a tribe of aggressive monkeys there, and he found suddenly that the monkeys were chasing him and started nipping at his heels, and the faster he walked, the faster they were chasing him, and he broke into a run, and they were on him, on his heels. And an wise old monk, seeing his predicament, said, "Hey there, monk, face the brutes, face the brutes." And he turned to face them, and they backed off. And that's a great lesson that he would tell this experience, that when we face our fears, they flee. When we face that which is chasing us, it flees. When we face it with the kind of boldness that Swami Vivekananda had. Another fascinating, perhaps less well-known incident, in England. He was in England, walking with Miss Mueller, one of his students, and most probably Edwin Sturdy. Was it Edwin Sturdy? Sturdy, anyhow, Mr. Sturdy. So they were walking in a field, and a bull, an English bull, charged at them. And I've seen big bulls. I've never had one charge at me, but just seeing them is frightening. And to have one charge at you must be very frightening. And indeed it was, because Sturdy fled and jumped over a fence and escaped. And Miss Mueller was not so nimble, and after she went as far as she could, and then she could run no more and sank to the ground. So what happened? Quoting Nivedita's description, seeing this and unable to aid Miss Mueller, Swamiji, thinking, so this is the end after all, took up his stand in front of her with folded arms. So he stood in between Miss Mueller, collapsed on the ground, and the bull, thinking, so this is the end after all. And he told afterwards how his mind was occupied with a mathematical calculation as to how far the bull would be able to throw. Just think, there is a mad bull. I wonder how far. Let's see, the body is about 150 pounds, and the bull has like that. The force of the bull, maybe 10 yards, 15 yards. I wonder. Luckily for us, and for Swamiji maybe, the animal suddenly stopped a few paces off, and then, raising its head, retreated sullenly. So this is Swami Vivekananda's fearlessness. He told Nivedita, she had seen him in Kashmir after an attack of illness. He had been facing, he faced many serious illnesses. He lifted a couple of pebbles and said, whenever death approaches me, all weakness vanishes. I have neither fear, nor doubt, nor thought of the external. I simply busy myself making ready to die. I am as hard as that. And the stones struck one another in his hand. For I have touched the feet of God. Wonderful fearlessness of Swami Vivekananda. There's an ancient king named Bharthari who renounced his kingdom and lived as a hermit, and he wrote several little booklets. There's several little, you can say, I guess they weren't booklets in those days, little texts, composed several texts. And one of them is the 100 verses on renunciation. And there's a verse Swami Vivekananda used to love to recite, analyzing fear, how everything in our life really is touched with fear. And it goes like this: Bhoge roga bhayam kule chuti bhayam vitte nripalad bhayam Mane dainya bhayam bale ripu bhayam rupe jaraya bhayam shastre vadi bhayam gune khala bhayam kaye kritam tad bhayam sarvam vastu bhayamitam bhuvinrinam vairagyameva bhayam. Bhayam, of course, being fear. In enjoyment is fear of disease. In social position, the fear of losing that position. In wealth, the fear of hostile kings who could steal it away. And nowadays, the fear of a crashing stock market. In honor, the fear of humiliation. In power, the fear of enemies. In beauty, the fear of old age. In scriptural erudition, the fear of opponents. in those days, the pundits would have some position in a court somewhere, a paid position. But if some other pundit would come along and challenge them to a debate, and if they lose the debate, then they also lose their position. So that's why in scriptural erudition would be the fear of opponents. In virtue, the fear of scandal. In the body, the fear of death. In this life, all is fraught with fear. Vairagya alone is fearless. Vairagya. It's a wonderful analysis, so many kinds of fear. And what is the remedy that Bharthari finds? It is vairagya, dispassion, detachment, intense detachment. Can we be at least a little detached? The more we cling to something, the more it hurts if it's pulled from our grasp. But if we freely give it, there's no pain at all. Value nothing material and do not cling to it, says Swami Vivekananda. If you cling to nothing, not even life, then there is no fear. Of course, vairagya has a dual meaning. On the one hand, intense detachment, and on the other, intense attachment towards the divine, intense attachment for God. So thus far we've been discussing more or less the path of wisdom, jnana yoga, and how we can analyze our fears, face our fears, emphasize who we are as the antidote to fears, detaching ourselves from those things we are attached to, which all give rise to fear. Now, the path of devotion also is a wonderful antidote to fear. And we can do no better than turn to John the Evangelist in the Gospel of, rather in the letter of John to somebody. He writes from the Christian Bible, God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. There is no fear in love. But perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. This wonderful and powerful statement, perfect love casts out fear. Swami Vivekananda is also quotes this. He says, generally speaking, human religions begin with fear. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, is the old quote. But later becomes the higher idea, perfect love casts out fear. So really, perfect love is oneness. So actually, bhakti, devotion, love, and jnana, wisdom, are pointing in the same way. Only jnana says, there is nothing apart from me, so how can what is there to fear? And bhakti says, love, which is the highest expression of oneness, casts out fear. So it's oneness, really, which is casting out fear. Swamiji says, there is only one individual, and each of us is that. Oneness alone is love and fearlessness. It is separation which leads us to hatred and fear. And he gives this example of a tiger. And he was speaking once to a group of young women in England, and he said, suppose there's a tiger in the road. All of you will be terrified of it. Just think the fear we would feel seeing a tiger in the road. But suppose now there's a baby in the path of the tiger. You will be at the mouth of the tiger in a moment, each one of you, I guarantee it. That love, the love for the baby, brings fearlessness even to the mother who will face the tiger, face the jaws of the tiger to protect her baby. Perhaps the real essence, the last word of bhakti yoga, of the path of devotion, is sharanagati, taking refuge, surrendering utterly to the divine. So taking shelter in that abode of fearlessness and love. And there's a wonderful song of Ram Prasad, which really expresses this idea to my mind perfectly. It's a song which Sri Ramakrishna loved very much, and he used to sing it often. And it goes like this: I have surrendered my soul at the fearless feet of the mother. Can I be afraid of death anymore? Can Yama, the king of death, frighten me anymore? I have surrendered my soul. I have dedicated my life utterly at those feet of the Divine Mother, which grant fearlessness forever, because they grant me that refuge which cannot be penetrated by anything else, that they grant me that realization that I am one with the Mother. Abhay pade pran shopechi, ami ar ki jomer bhoy rekhechi. Abhay pade pran shopechi. Then there's some wonderful lines. The line that I love especially: the wish-fulfilling tree of heaven, the Kalpataru, I have planted deep in my heart. I have planted, the name of Kali is the Kalpataru. The name of my Divine Mother Kali is that wish-fulfilling tree, that Kalpataru. I have planted it deep in my heart. When Yama, the king of death, comes, when he comes for me, I will open my heart and show it to him growing there. I will show him that tree. Kali Nama Maha, Kali Nama Kalpataru, হৃদয়ে রোপণ করেছি এবার সমন এলে, হৃদয় খুলে দেখাবো তাই বসে আছি, অভয় পদে প্রাণ সঁপেছি. The song is suffused with this spirit of fearlessness and utter devotion, utter surrender to the Divine Mother. As our practice of Sharanagati grows, as our faith in the truth of the Vedanta grows, so lessens our fear of death. As we are more able to put the principles of Vedanta, the spiritual principles, into practice in our lives, as they become the guiding force in our lives, as our Shraddha, our whole attitude of mind becomes completely colored and directed by our conviction in the reality of spirit, that I am indestructible, that I have a Divine Mother, that I have a Divine Father, that I have a Savior, that so long as Krishna protects me, none can kill me. And if Krishna wants to take me, who can save me? Then we are attaining to fearlessness. What does this look like? One who is utterly dedicated to the Lord. What kind of fearlessness do we see there? Look at Swami Mahayogananda, what he writes to his brother disciples, thrilling language. To work with undaunted energy. What fear? Who is powerful enough to thwart you? We shall crush the stars to atoms and unhinge the universe. Don't you know who we are? We are the servants of Sri Ramakrishna. Fear? Whose fear? Whom to fear? It is those foolish people who identify themselves with their bodies that piteously cry, ho, ho, we are weak, we are low. All this is atheism. Now that we have attained the state beyond fear, we shall have no more fear and become heroes. This indeed is the faith which we, the servants of Sri Ramakrishna, will choose. How thrilling. Of course, the original is Sanskrit verses. We don't have time to read all the Sanskrit. But Ramakrishna dasa vayam. We are the servants of Sri Ramakrishna. We are the servants of that God-man who came to grant fearlessness to all. How can we have any fear being his servants? This is how, with this kind of fearlessness, a group of young men barely beyond their teenage years were able to shake the world as they have, based on their realization, their unshakable conviction in their Guru, knowing themselves to be servants of the Supreme. So I think we'll close by just adjusting the temperature a little bit and going back to that glorious day on January 1st, 1886, when Sri Ramakrishna blessed his devotees. Sri Ramakrishna, of course, had been suffering from throat cancer, and he was moved in December of 1885 to Kashipur, a suburb of Calcutta. He had been in Calcutta, but the air was polluted even back then, and it was hurting his throat. So they moved him to a suburb, a beautiful garden house. You can still visit the place today. It's a wonderful place of pilgrimage with a pond and lots of greenery, trees, grass, and he felt quite a bit better. And then a new physician, Dr. Rajendranath Datta, prescribed the Lycopodium 200. He was under homeopathic treatment. And there was, for about 2 weeks, there was quite a good result from this treatment. And on January 1st, he came down. He came down from he was on the second story of the building. He came down to the ground and he was walking around outside. And of course, it was a holiday, January 1st, and there were many devotees present at the garden house. And of course, seeing Sri Ramakrishna walking, they were thrilled. They thought maybe now he's recovering from his illness, he's getting better. Then there was a second group of devotees sitting under a tree. They also saw him, and they got up and they saluted him from a distance, and they came over. And among them was Girish Ghosh, the famous dramatist and ex-Bohemian, who gradually became ex-Bohemian through the blessings of Sri Ramakrishna. Girish had been proclaiming Sri Ramakrishna as an avatar, as an incarnation of God. And Sri Ramakrishna, he didn't really like that exactly. He thought, who is this guy, just a playwright? What does he know about what is an incarnation of God? But anyhow, Girish had this strong faith. Now, when Sri Ramakrishna saw Girish, he asked him, what have you seen in me that you say so many things about me? What have you seen in me? But Girish was never one to be at a loss for words. In fact, he was so gifted, it said that he could dictate 2 different plays at the same time. He'd have 2 different scribes, and because they were slow in writing, so he dictated a line to this one, and then for a different play, he dictated a line here. So he was never at a loss for words. So he knelt at Sri Ramakrishna's feet, folded his hands, and looking up at him said, what more can I say of him, whose greatness Vyasa and Valmiki could find no words to express? Vyasa, the great compiler of the Vedas and Mahabharata, Valmiki, the writer of the Ramayana, if even they could not find the right words to express the glory of the divine, how could I, lowly Girish, find words to describe your greatness? This charmed Sri Ramakrishna. He was charmed. He said, he went into a mood and he said, what more shall I say to you? May you all be blessed with spiritual awakening. In the original Bengali, Tomader ar ki bolibo, Ashirbad kori, Tomader choitanna hok. Choitanna, this consciousness, may your spiritual consciousness be awakened. May you be illumined. Swami Saradananda describes this blessed moment, and I'll read a little section from Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, Swami Saradananda's biography. Beside himself with love and compassion for the devotees, hardly had he said those few words when he entered into ecstasy. Those words of profound blessing, untouched by the slightest tinge of selfishness, directly entered the devotees' hearts, where they raised high billows of bliss. They forgot time and space, forgot the disease of the master, and forgot their previous determination not to touch him till he recovered, and were aware only that out of sympathy for them in their plight, an extraordinary divine being, feeling excruciating pain at their misery, and his heart overflowing with compassion, had come down to them from heaven and called them affectionately to him for giving protection, like a mother sheltering her children against all ills by covering them lovingly with the upper part of her sari. Then they all became eager to bow down to him and take the dust of his feet, and filling the quarters with cries of joy, glory, began saluting him one after another. As they were thus bowing down to him, the sea of the Master's compassion transcended all bounds and brought about a wonderful phenomenon. We had almost daily seen the Master at Dakshineshwar losing himself in grace and compassion for certain devotees and blessing them by his extraordinary, potent touch in the state of divine semi-consciousness. He began touching each of the devotees assembled on that day in that divine mood. The joy of the devotees, it is superfluous to say, knew no bounds at that act of the Master. They felt that he would not henceforward keep concealed the fact of his divinity, either from them or from anybody else in the world. And knowing as they did, nevertheless, their own defects, spiritual destitution and incapability, they had not the slightest doubt that all alike, the sinner as well as the afflicted, would find a refuge at his feet, a touch of which dispelled all fear forever. So this is how Swami Saradananda describes the blessed moment when Sri Ramakrishna revealed himself to them as a spiritual giant. They failed to find words to describe what happened, and yet they found someone here ready to grant them spiritual illumination, revealing to them that he has the power to grant them the spiritual illumination and refuge and fearlessness. That blessing of Sri Ramakrishna, Tomadera Chaitanya Hok, may your spiritual consciousness be awakened, is still flowing down. He uttered it on January 1st, 1886, and it is reverberating down through the decades. And let us see if we can hear that blessing in our hearts and receive the blessing of spiritual awakening, which he has come to distribute to all of humankind. Thank you. Om. Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Stunvanti Divyaistavai Vedaya Sangapada Kramopanishadai Gayanti Yam Samaga Dhyanavastita tadgatena manasa Pashyanti yam yogino Yasyantam navidu Surasuragana Devaya tasmai namaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Our salutations to him who is the truth of life and existence, and whom the sages call by various names. Our salutations to him whose glory is sung in the sacred hymns of the various scriptures of the world, but whose limitless and infinite grandeur no mortal mind can comprehend. Our salutations to him on whom the devotees meditate in the shrine of their hearts and realize his ineffable presence in their deepest contemplations. May he illumine our understanding and prompt our minds to the path of truth and righteousness. May he reveal himself unto our souls and dispel the gloom of delusion, fear, doubt, and darkness. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all.